the most mysterious crop circles on Earth weren't made by aliens, but by humans channeling something far stranger. In this episode, we pull back the veil on the hidden world of circle makers and their mind bending encounters at ancient sites where art, energy, and the unexplained collide. Hi, and welcome to the U World Order Showcase podcast, where we feature life, health, transformational coaches, and spiritual entrepreneurs stepping up to be the change they seek in the world. I'm your host, Jill Hart, on a mission to help coaches and entrepreneurs amplify their voice, monetize their mission, and get visible. If you're ready to start attracting premium clients without chasing algorithms or hunting people down like a banshee on a mission, head over to coachesalchemist.com and schedule your free client acquisition audit. It's the first step in building a business where your clients seek you out rather than you having to hunt them down. Today, we are chatting with Citizen Dee. Dee is a retired crop circle maker, Fortian researcher, and author of It Can't Be People, Voices from the Inner Circle. With decades inside one of the most secretive communities in modern folklore, he's now revealing the truth behind the human-made formations that have baffled scientists and spiritual seekers alike. Through his work on itcan'tbepeople.substack.com, Citizen Dee explores how the act of circle making often transcends art, touching on synchronicity, consciousness, and a phenomena that defy explanation. His upcoming book uncovers firsthand account from the makers themselves and challenges everything we think we know about this mysterious global phenomena. Welcome to the show, Dee. It's great to have you with us. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, I got to tell you.
Yeah, it's been in the diary for quite a bit, quite a long time, Jill. So yeah, mutual.
Awesome. Awesome. And so I'm going to ask you the big question, which is what's the most significant thing in your opinion? Excuse me. What's the most significant thing in your opinion as individuals we can do to make an impact on how the world is going?
I think we need to go beyond, back from the technocratic age that we're in now. We need to go back to our primal instincts that our ancestors knew far more about than we did. That's
Mm.
my opinion. I think we're heading head first for God knows what. We need to get more personal, and there needs to be more love in the world. That's what I think.
I love that. I love that. So let's get started, dive right into this. What inspired you to begin making crop circles, and how did you first get involved in what many consider a modern mystery?
I think we're quite aligned in some of the things we're talking about. I mean, I'm a very spiritual person, and I've always had a deep-seated interest in the paranormal. I don't really know where it came from. When I saw Close Encounters, it looked to me as a 10-year-old more like a documentary than a film, because I had this latent, like, it was like I was remembering something rather than seeing something for the first. It's very hard to explain, but when I saw Close Encounters, I thought, hold on a minute, this isn't new. I was kind of like thinking that it's something to do with the collective consciousness. Obviously, I didn't think of that as a 10-year-old. So I was into everything. I was into Loch Ness and ghosts and Bigfoot and everything. As a child, you just eat that stuff, you know. We had this magazine called The Unexplained as well, which had, like, remote viewing and the Turing, all the world's mysteries. I just lapped it up as a child. But then I really started to drill down into ufology, because ufology was like a developing phenomenon. Whereas you had like ectoplasm and spirituality, you had spiritualism, you had all these like trending things, like, like they tended to be in fashion for 10 years and then they'd go. I mean, no one knows where ectoplasm is now, it's just gone. But with ufology, it was a developing phenomenon which was always there, and was just altering, and it was always there. We were seeing different types of craft, different types of beings from like the Nordics and the Greys. Just fascinating. And I joined the British UFO Research Association, and back in those days, Jill, as you probably remember, it was a beautiful golden time. It was before the internet, so all you had was the literature and going to lectures. And we had like the MUFON review, which came out 6 monthly. We had like the British UFO Research Association periodicals. You had to wait for them, and they'd normally be talking about classic cases like Kelly Hopkinsville or Zamora or Gulf Breeze or and but then there'd be sort of but then they'd be interlaced with new reports. Now they started to feature these crop circles in the early to mid 80s in the UFO casebooks, which came out every year. And in those days, they were very simple. They were single indentations into the crop, which literally made them look like birthed flying saucers. And sometimes you'd have four tiny satellite circles around them so that they look like the old B movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still tropes, like the UFOs with like the tripods, and they just literally look like flying saucers. And their precedent was the 1970s Australian tally nests, which were also circular indentations, but they were done in grass rather than in crop. So because they were done in crop in Wiltshire and in the outlying areas, they were far more pronounced because like the crop was like 1 or 2 foot tall. And nobody knew what they were. Um, and then we started to see the phenomenon develop into like the classic Led Zeppelin cover, which you probably saw, which is from the Autumn Barnes formation from 1990. Now, this is a really important point because that circle was like door keys and corridors and like it was like interconnecting dumbbells. It does not look like a landed UFO. No UFO looks like that. But what had happened was the connection between flying saucers and crop circles was already so ingrained in the public psyche as being connected that it's a very clunky connection when you got to the news circles. But the public couldn't they couldn't deconnect the two. So they went from being birthed flying saucers to messages from our space brothers within the space of like a week, and that's a very tenuous connection. So that's why my interest was sparked. And I lived in London at the time, and I didn't realise how close Wiltshire was. So I decided one year just to come and visit as many as I could. And I was like many believers. I was convinced it was Mother Earth or Gaia or secret military testing or nature spirits or UFOs. I had no idea, but I didn't think there was any human element to it whatsoever. And I used to use this resource called the cropcircleconnector.com, which would tell you where the new circles were, because the season runs from like April to September. And I used to plot these things and go and visit the lot within the space of a couple of days. But crucially, if I wanted to see 15 in 2 days, if I found out from whatever source, because I wasn't in the inner circle then, if reports came back that two of those 15 were man-made, I just wouldn't bother. I wasn't interested in man-made formations. And I held the crop circle makers, the hoaxers as they're known, in the same contempt, the same disdain that a lot of your listeners may hold me, in that, they think, the mystery is deep enough as it is. We don't want these idiots coming in and making it all the more mysterious. It's already mysterious. Don't, keep out of it. Like, Bigfoot footage, keep out of it. Just the mystery is bad enough. The mystery is deep enough. But then I started to hear about normally second or third hand apocryphal tales of strange things that were happening with circle making teams. And they were normally based on dream driven and synchronicity events rather than physical events. And that's where I started to become really interested. And I thought, and I didn't want to think it, but I thought, if there are humans involved in this, making a couple of them or some of them, is that worthy of investigation? And it takes a kind of bravery to do that, because a lot of people can't do that. But I thought, okay, I've got to go in. If you're going to research something properly, you've got to be completely objective. You can't have confirmation bias. Let's see if there's anything to these human-made crop circles, even if it's like 2 or 5%. And that was where my interest was sparked.
Interesting. Do you think it's connected at all to, you know, the old, I don't know what they're called, but there's markings on the earth that are they're definitely designs.
Yeah, the Nazca lines
Yeah.
in,
y-
in Peru. Yeah,
Yeah.
we think there are very strong parallels because people miss a fundamental question here, and it's the same question that links the pyramids, Stonehenge, Avebury.
Mhm.
Everyone says, how was it done? No one says why. And I think that's the biggest key fundamental question. I've no doubt that the Nazca lines were man-made, okay? But you've got to prompt the question, why would somebody go to all of that trouble? And we've got Silbury Hill here, which is a monument, an ancient monument. Now that took 100 years to build. Now, why would an architect undertake a project like that when they know that only their great grandchildren would see the completion and they'd be dead before it was finished? It's really important to say, why is this happening? Why undertake a project like that, or the pyramids, or Stonehenge, or these ancient stone circles, and the Nazca lines?
Yeah. I, do you have an answer? Can you
No,
speculate?
no, I can't because because the key to what we're doing, and when I found out that humans were making crop circles, I was proper peed off. I was really angry because I thought I've wasted 10 years of my life researching this stuff, and then it looks as if it's, predominantly people. I was really annoyed for about 10 minutes. And then I thought, hold on, if humans are involved in this phenomenon and they're experiencing these dreams and they're getting supreme coincidences, like almost engineered synchronicities, surely that makes the mystery far, far deeper than birth flying saucers if it's something which is connecting with the human psyche.
Yeah, and we're talking about huge projects. I mean, crop
Mm,
circles are acres
mm.
of land, and you really can't tell what you're doing except from above. I mean, just the mechanics of creating them without being able to see it, especially with those ley lines or those lines that you were talking about. They're very large, and they were created at a time by human beings, but because we have the ability to look down on the surface of the realm that we are engaged in, um we can make sense of it, but from creating it, you're standing, and then you're moving into a field to create these things. It seems,
I was I was baffled.
yeah,
I thought, how the hell can this be done?
yeah.
And and then one day, what happened was I spent all of my work holiday. I thought, I'm going to go to Wiltshire and I'm going to try and solve this, which is a pretty arrogant thing to do. Why should I get the mystery solved in 3 weeks when people have been studying it for like years and years? And there's a lot of researchers do that. They go, well, I went there and I spent 2 weeks there. I'm sorry, that's just not good enough. So I spent a long time here over the course of 1 year. There was 40 circles that year, and I visited the lot. And I'd normally get into them really quickly as well because we had this resource called the Crop Circle Connector. And a crop circle is like a crime scene. It's literally a crime scene in that it's vandalism and it's trespass and it's criminal damage. But it's also like CSI in that if you don't get to it quickly, Jill, before the tourists have got there and before it's been trampled by the hordes, what you're going to see is muddy footprints everywhere. It's going to be trashed to bits because it's been contaminated by hundreds of people. You have to see a circle fresh and clean, you know. But I started to hear these stories, and I was overheard once saying, look, I don't really care how they've got there. I'm more concerned about the effects once they're there, because people have situations where their phones die, the batteries go on their phone. I've seen this, it's true, it's all true. I was more interested in the effects of what happened when the circle was there. And I was overheard one night, and this guy said to me, look, we've been watching you for a few weeks, and we think that you are aligned, mentally to spiritually to what we're doing. We've got a crop circle that we haven't finished, because that's quite often the case. People say, well, this can't be made, that can't be made over 2 or 5 hours. A lot of them are done over 2 or 3 nights, but they're so isolated that they don't get spotted, or if they do get spotted, they just don't get reported, or they do get reported and they're added to. So I thought, I've got nothing to lose. What I'm going to do, I'd heard all these stories, and I thought, right, I'm going to go out tonight with these people, finish this crop circle, and I was honoured to be asked. And I
Mhm.
thought, I phoned my partner and I said, look, if I'm going out, I've been invited out tonight. If nothing happens, if nothing spooky happens, I promise you, because I've got a very long-suffering partner, she doesn't believe in any of this. I said, I promise you, if I go out tonight and nothing happens, I'm going to shut my books, blah blah. I'm just going to go back to UFOs. I'm not interested. It's all. I'm not interested. If nothing happens, I'll just start my researches somewhere else. And we went out, and nothing happened. We were there for 3 hours. We finished the circle. It was a team of, I think, 15 people. Five of them were tourists from America that had been recruited like the night before.
Mhm.
The other lot of the crew, they were all experienced crop circle makers. And I was mentored during the day, or during the early evening, because a crop circle team is only as good as its weakest link. So they told me what I'll be doing. Now, in those days, I was just a foot soldier. I was like a stomper, just a stormtrooper. All you're doing is just flattening crop. You're not doing the complicated marking out. You're just not good enough to do it. You wouldn't have to do it. So anyway, we did this crop circle. Nothing happened. I was extremely peed off. I'm thinking these people are just fantasists. It's all made up. They're just trying to pad their part. It's just, hoaxes. It's exactly what I thought it was. What a waste of time. And then when we finished the crop circle, I saw this flash of light go off right at the perimeters, right at the outer line it was. And my first thought was, oh shit, we've been filmed. People are taking Polaroid flashbulb pictures of us. People are taking pictures of us. This is criminal damage. It's going to affect my employment. It said that, yeah, I was really, really scared. I thought we've been done. People have been watching this. And the flashes were as if people were crouching down in the crops. So they were sort of as if you were crouching down and taking a picture. And I said to the team leader, I said, I don't need this. I should never have done this. And he said, don't worry about it. And then this single flash multiplied into 10, then 20, then 30 flashes. And they sprinkled themselves around the perimeter of the circle. I describe it in my Substack as the biggest necklace in the world. They were glistening. And I just said to the team leader, what the freaking hell is that? And he said, because he'd done hundreds, I think, a lot, an awful lot. And he said, don't worry, we get this a lot. This is just a round of applause. We're being told that the circle is finished. We're being told not to do anything else to it because we might mess it up like you do when a painting's finished and then you add stuff to it. We're being told it's a round of applause, go home. And he said, he looked above and he said, okay, we've done our work now. Now you do yours. Now, what that means is that when a circle is made, it belongs to us. But when the circle is left by us, then it belongs to the world. It's not ours anymore. And he looked up and he said, yeah, okay, we're finished now. We're going home. Bye bye. Thank you. And then these lights just went flashed out, and that's when I first thought, what the freaking hell is happening? And then we went out the following night, and then when we started to make the circle, there was a pink UAP which appeared just as we were starting it. And we're in a military area, so you just think there's choppers. We've got all sorts of Apaches and Cherokees. This is a military area, so I thought, oh shit, that's a helicopter. We're going to get photographed again, and it didn't move. And it didn't move for 3.5 hours. And then when we finished the crop circle, it just went. And then I was hooked, Jill.
That is a wild, wild story. Does it happen every time you make
No,
circles?
no, it doesn't happen every time. And I've spoken to a lot of ufologists about this, and they
Mhm.
said we've never heard of waist level UAPs before. Um, but no, you see, you get people coming out for the spooky show. You get people coming out for the supernatural stuff, like I did the first time, and they're expecting to be entertained. Okay.
Mhm.
And what's really interesting, and where I think this has got a connection to the human psyche, is that we took a couple of girls out once. I suspected they were journalists, and I said to the team leader, "I've got a bad feeling about these people." And he went, "No, it's going to be fine. They just want to come and see the spooky stuff." And but it doesn't happen every time. It happens, but 40 to 50% you'll get a strange thing. Every time you'll get a funny thing or something eventful, but something that's potentially paranormal. It's 40 to 50%. Anyway, these girls come out with us. And you'd have thought, Jill, if somebody was to say to you, "Would you like to come and see a crop circle made tonight?" You'd jump at it. But I can tell you, after half an hour, you'd be bored out of your skin, because all it is a load of people milling around, stomping on boards. It takes about an hour to mark it out if it's a really, really big one. And at 2 a.m., one of these girls said, "Oh, I'm bored. This is boring. Where's the spooky stuff?" And then the second that she said that, this purple fluorescent corkscrew appeared in the air above a ridge above her. It was the size of a juggernaut, and it was within sniper range of her. And this thing, it had, like, it was purple, it had pink fluorescent edges, and it just went and went behind this ridge. And this collective whoa went up from the team, and this girl said, "What was that?" And it had kind of positioned itself so that she was the only person that hadn't seen it. And our team leader, which was the same guy, he said, "Look, it's not a pantomime. It's not going to perform. It's not going to perform party tricks for you. You've got to respect it to see it." So the answer to your question is no, not all the time. But when it does, you go. It sometimes you kind of need it reinforced, because you think, okay, this is my fifth time out since the last time. Did I imagine it? And but then something bang happens, and you go, okay, I'm right back in it again.
Oh, interesting. How do people who are making these crop circles come up with the idea that, okay, now is the time to make it and this is what it's going to look like?
What do you mean by now is the time to make it?
Well, what is the motivate, or it's not motivation, but it's the spark that causes them to say, okay, this is the design and I need to go out and do this.
Well, this is the rabbit hole. People talk about the UAPs, but really it's this stuff that I'm most interested in communicating. The circle, firstly, to get back to your point about seeing it from above, when you design a crop circle, and it took me a long, long time before I went out and did my first one, it's basically, if you can imagine like a math set, like a compass, and a set square, and it's all the stuff that you did at school at maths, okay? The geometric sets, except that like a centimeter on your page is going to be like a few feet in the field. So you don't actually have to see what you're doing when you're doing it, okay? If it doesn't link up, you're in trouble. Because if you're making a circle and then you find yourself in a different spot at the end, you've got a problem, okay? But the crop circle season is only from April, which begins in this horrible, yucky yellow canola stuff. It's really horrible. Oilseed. It's really horrible. Really hard to keep down. The stems are like broom handles. It's elastic. It's really, and they you can't get much done in that stuff. So the good stuff happens when the wheat and the barley is maturing, and then it's over. It's over by September because the farmers have cut their crop. So between September and April, you've got the rest of the year to like plot what you're going to do. But the interesting thing to me is that sometimes you'll get like trends where circles are of a fashion that season. And I've seen this. Circle makers will have stand-up arguments with each other, saying, "Where the freaking hell did you get my design from? I was going to stick that exact design down next week, and you've beat me to it by a week." And it's not like a yin yang. It was something unusual. It was like a jellyfish, I think. It was something that had never been seen in the fields before. Then you go to you go to a maker formation, and then you'd see that somebody's already done that exact same thing, either in that field or in a field a couple of fields away. So in answer to your question, sometimes you've got to question where that spark has come from,
Yeah.
because if you're using, like, if you're emptying your mind and you're saying, okay, I'll just think of an idea. Are you actually then communicating telepathically with the other potential makers who are, like, talking to you through the sheldrake species field, through the collective consciousness? Or is there something else? And that's the only part of the whole conundrum that I don't know the answer to. I don't know if we're collectively connecting into our primordial consciousness that our ancestors had, that we've forgotten about now with this technocratic age, or if there is something else at play here. Some people say it's a game of chess, but we're not playing it with the pieces. That's the only part of the conundrum where I don't have the answer. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to have the answers to everything that you asked today, because we don't know the answers to a lot of this stuff. But you'd rather that than me BS you.
For sure, for sure. Can I ask you another question? And this is just from my own perspective, and I've been interested in this stuff for a really long time as well. So it seems like crop circles aren't as prevalent or as done as often as they were for a while. It
Mm,
seems like maybe the 80s and maybe into the 90s, it was like all summer long you were hearing about crop circles, but then
yeah.
it doesn't seem like they're made that often anymore.
Well,
Am I mistaken?
from a purely admin point of view, I mean, like, what you're saying is correct. I mean, it was the 90s and the 2000s where you couldn't fall over for them. As I
Mhm.
said to you, I visited 45, and I think
Yeah,
there was 60 that season. I've visited hundreds, but if you're thinking from a purely human point of view, what you've got to think is those artists get old and they just retire,
right.
and other people take up the mantle, and their first circles are awful. Now, it's a very important point here. I I don't want to burst the bubble of all of your listeners. I started this round of interviews back in April, and I would say they're all man-made, 100%. I'm not taking that view anymore, because I'd have been really annoyed with me, at the beginning of my journey, to hear that. So what I'm saying to you, you've got to go on your own journey. But if you're prepared to accept that a proportion are man-made, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there is something still going on. It's still a nice mystery. I'm not sure if it's a nice mystery, but there's still a mystery to it. But yeah, a lot of the artists retired, and then we've had new ones coming in. We've got this sort of defense which is used by a lot of researchers, saying, well, you can always tell a crap circle because it's wonky, it hasn't got the precision, it's rubbish, look at the lines, they're awful. But what they don't take into account or what they know and don't tell you, is that this is like being in a rock and roll band. Okay, if you're in a rock and roll band and you're rehearsing in artist's basement, you can choose when you go and doing your first gig. You can wait 6 months. You can hit as many bum notes as you like. You go out when you're ready. Okay, you do not have that luxury as a new crop circle making team. You're rehearsing in the open air and you're being booed on the internet. Okay, so if you go out in a new team and you're all new, okay, and you haven't got a mentor or an old veteran, you are going to make rubbish, okay? But then in 2 or 3 years' time, those artists that you're laughing at for making crap circles are the same artists that you're revering their work as being E.T. or Gaia.
Hmm, interesting. Sounds like tagging in some ways.
How do you mean?
You know, the people that some of the spray paint artists, they are like
Oh, that's really
so
interesting. Oh, that's mad.
incredible,
That's
but
mad. I've just done a Substack article about this. I'm writing it now.
no
Where,
way.
yeah, I'm doing it right now about signifiers and markers and signatures. It's like Banksy. We can look at, I can look at a piece of art and say, I know who that is because his speciality is the spikes and the crescents and the stars. I know who did that. Or if it wasn't him, it's someone else that's been out with him and he's trained them, especially if it's a bad version. It's someone that's gone out by themselves and hasn't got it quite right yet. But yeah,
Mm,
we could look at a formation and go, either that's made by T or that's made by somebody that's worked with T, and they will nick their tropes until they sort of become experienced and put their own signifiers in. So yeah, there's definitely an element of that to it.
interesting, interesting. So you're writing a book. It can't be people.
Yeah.
And you talk about people from your inner circle. What's one story or revelation that still gives you chills?
What, from my own experience or from one that I've taken from another circle maker?
Oh, either or. You told us about the purple
Yeah.
corkscrew thing.
But that's like, because that's physical, you know.
Mhm.
It was really important, but it's not the stuff that I'm really interested in. The stuff that I'm really interested in is like the engineering and like where you just think there's a hidden hand, whether that be us tele telepathically talking to each other or
Mhm.
whether it be, you know, external. But the one that really gets me, that wasn't me, was and this encapsulates the whole thing. I know a circle maker who back in the early 2000s was, he lives in the area. He woke up at midnight, just he was knackered, he was really tired, he'd had a long day and he was really tired, but he woke up at midnight with this compulsion to make a crop circle, and the crop circle design was in his head and the actual location was also in his head. And he said, I had to get up in the end, but it wasn't like this joyous, hallelujah, religious reaction to a calling. It was like when your cat is pouring at you with food, or it's like when your barn door is going in the wind. You have to get up, and it's the only way. So he got up and it was midnight, so he didn't have time to rustle together a team because obviously everyone's in bed and like nobody's going to get up at midnight because most circles start at 10 because you've got these hours between 10 and 3 a.m. to get it done. So he had to use tent pegs rather than other team members. So you dig the tent peg in the ground and that's your other team. So you mark your circle out. But yet, because it was only him, you have to keep putting the tent peg somewhere else. It's really a pain in the ass to do. So he got his kit together. He knew he was resigned that he had to do it, and he went to a field which was closer to the one that he was being compelled to go to. And I said, why did you go there, Em? He went, because I just couldn't be bothered to go to the other one. It was too far. So he tried to do the circle in this, surrogate alternative field, But the second that he tried to do it, he had nausea, he had headaches, he had this horrible, he didn't throw up, but it was really, he felt awful, like
Hmm.
nausea, really bad. So, and then the second that he come out of the field and went, okay, all right, and went to the actual field, it went. So he made this crop circle by himself, which by his own admission was a little bit beyond his own capabilities, but there were problems that he could have had with it, but he got it done. And but he was hearing like a party going on in the next field, like it was like sort of a ritual chanting, bongos, people like chanting, like a rite sort of thing. And he thought, well, I better be careful because I was going to use the flashlight to check my bearings, but I can't do that, and I can't whistle or sing, so there's a chance I could be caught. Anyway, he got the crop circle done. And then the next, and he basically he chucked his kit into these brambles and thought, well, I can't go back with it now. It's daylight now. I can't go back now. I'll just. He basically just fell asleep on the spot. It was about 3 o'clock. Woke up early, sort of 8, 9 ish, and there was these 6 girls freaking out in his circle, and they were really freaking out. And he was thinking, well, it was good, but it wasn't that good. But they were really, really exhilarated and really excited, dancing and whooping around, and he walked up to them in the guise of somebody that had just got there, like a rambler.
Hmm.
And he sort of said, "What's going on?" And they said, and this girl was grappling for something around her neck. And he goes, "Well," and she goes, and they were absolutely delighted. And she was grappling for something around her neck. She goes, "Look, turns out they were Wiccans or pagans." And they said, "We've been supplicating for Mother Nature to give us a gift. We wanted this in the field." And she took off her pendant, and obviously it's the same pattern that he'd made. So he was freaked out, and the penny started to drop. And he said to them, "Well, when did you start doing your supplications? When did you start doing your spells?" And they went, "Well, midnight, of course, when Wicca is at its most powerful." And of course, that's the time that he woke up. But the second part of the story is, I said to us, he said to them, we having a party last night?" Because that's what made him quiet. And they went, "No." He said, "How did you do your spell?" She goes, "Well, we just invoke it internally or we whisper it." And he thinks that he was, this is going to sound crazy. He thinks that what he heard was some sort of oral representation of what their spell was, and it was there to make him be guarded, because if he wasn't guarded, they'd have caught him, and if they'd have caught him, then they wouldn't have got their present. So it's multi-layered, if you see what I mean. And that's the one where I think you've got everything in there. You've got the collective consciousness, you've got Wicca, you've got a crop circle, but there's something else at play. And everybody was happy, the girls were delighted with it. He obviously didn't tell them the truth because he didn't want to burst their bubble. And they wouldn't have believed him anyway. Because people have situations in crop circles, they have magical experiences in crop circles, and they take that as proof that it can't be man-made. Okay, when our argument is that we are placing sigils into the land in ancient, revered, respected sites. And we think that the very act of and the intent of that sigil is enough to generate. And don't forget, these are on ley lines, okay?
Hmm.
We think that we're kind of amplifying the energy that our ancestors knew back to front, but we don't. So we're kind of like playing at it. But we think the act of actually imprinting these sigils on particular dates in particular places, that's what's bringing the magic. And to a certain extent, Jill, it doesn't really matter how they got there. It's what they do when they're there, which is how I became interested in the first place.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Yeah, I'm. This is going to sound silly, but I've been watching this show called The Librarians, and they're all about protecting the magic because for a long time there was magic in the world. And to some extent, magic is just science that hasn't been explained.
Mhm. Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Absolutely.
but it does still exist. There is a lot that happens in the world that if we can slow down and just look at it for what it is and not have to explain it,
Yeah,
there is still a lot of wonder and, yeah, magic
I
that
couldn't agree.
that
I couldn't agree
happens
more.
to us all the time. And it seems like these crop circles, uh, whether they're all man-made or not man-made, it doesn't really even matter. It's that
Mm,
they exist. They're brought into existence, and there is some energy that is either a result of them being made, or was the impetus for them to be made. Um, eh, that too doesn't matter. But
yeah,
now they have been brought into this realm and have become a thing, and it has its own energy, and it's going to impact those that see it or experience it, or and also those that were involved in the creation of it.
I
It's
totally agree. I mean, people say about, when witches used to cast spells,
Mhm.
you still needed a human witch to do it. The witch wasn't ethereal. The witch wasn't a spirit. The witch was a human, you know? And the important thing with this subject is, hand on heart, Jill, honestly, I'm prepared to have my mind changed at any point. If you could give me definitive, 100%, not speculative, if you could give me 100% proof, 100% proof that some crop circles aren't man-made, I'm really prepared to go down that investigative route, But where I am now is that I don't see, even though I can't do it, I can look at a crop circle and think, well, I've been out with the masters, I've been out with the best, or second division best, and I can't do it, but I can see how it's done. But the other important thing is, when I said to you before about the tunny nests and those single circles, I don't know how they got there. I honestly, I've been in a couple. They're not reported or they're not seen because they don't look pretty on calendars. We're in an age now where it's JPEGs, it's like, high definition on phones. It's got to be pretty. If it's not pretty, it's fake. People overlook these ones, okay? They were mostly predominant in the 80s, and they're like the single, sort of birthed UFO ones. I'm not saying that they're birthed UFOs. What I'm saying is a lot of the research, we don't know what they are. And I sometimes they look like crop damage, and I've been in them. It looks like it's too formed to be crop damage, but not round enough to be like a decent circle. And I've been in those things, and like the crop's bent inches up. You can't do that with a board. And the real researchers, the people that are really objective, that are really, still into the mystery part of it, are saying we still don't know what they are, those early ones. Because sometimes there's no tram lines in the field, and you
Yeah,
need
I
the
was just
tram
gonna
like you need the track, you need the tram line to go in there to, and then what you do, once you're in the tram line, once you found where you're going to be, you then take very, if you've got a five-man team, you spread it in a row, and then you do big steps into the crop. You don't follow each other straight line, okay? But you need that tram line, to get you into the field. There's
otherwise it looks like somebody tromped across the field.
Yeah, well, you see, sometimes what happens is, because it's back to this CSI thing, people will say, that's man-made. You can see where they walked in. No, you can't. You can see the 300 people afterwards because that's been taken 3 days later, But that's just a little secret of the trade there. If you've got a five-man team, you go in a row and you take big steps over the crop. But sometimes these things had no tram lines, and you think, no, how can that be done? You know? So I still think there's an element of mystery with those single ones, because I've been in a couple, and they don't get reported though, Jill, because it's not pretty. But yeah, there's still an
And they
element of
can't
those
really
early ones.
explain it. It's hard to say, well, those were
No,
man-made too. Look.
fundamentally, the problem is we are now in a world of ever decreasing attention spans, and if it
Mhm.
isn't blingy and pretty, you'll just say it's fake. Whereas our contention is the simpler the circle, the more likely it is to be real because we
Hmm.
can't understand those early ones, you know?
Yeah, this is all so fascinating, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it, Dee. We've just been able to look at some of the taking crop circles out of these are all aliens, and you can either
Yeah.
believe in aliens or you cannot believe in aliens, into a bigger look at them in terms of it. It could just be consciousness
Yeah.
asking us to do things.
Yeah, I'm really interested in, as I said, when I spoke to you about being a ufologist, which I am a die-hard ufologist, I
Oh,
don't really read new stuff. My grounding was like John Keel and J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée and John Spencer and Jenny Randalls. They're the key people for me. I don't really read about Roswell too much. I don't really read about Area 51. I'm more into the mechanics of the phenomenon. And Jacques Vallée, who is the godfather in my opinion, talks about ufology in terms of something which interacts with the human psyche. He said it's not ET, it's not spacemen, it's not from outer space, it's from inner space. And the chances are it's probably interdimensional and it masquerades as ET. Okay. So it makes you think it's ET. Um, and that's where I'm with the crop circle phenomenon as well. I think you're supposed to think that it's that. But as J. Allen Hynek is the godfather of ufology, he was, brought in for the Majestic 12. I mean, you know who he is. He said many years ago before he died, he said, we are not in a state in our evolution where we think we're clever. We're actually primitive. Okay. We need to get back to, source, He says, even if the UFO problem was solved and we were given the answers today, we are not in a position where we'd even understand it. It's quite arrogant for us to think that we can have, with respect, you and me, it's quite arrogant for us to sit here and say we've got the answers. I don't think we're mentally developed enough to understand a lot of this stuff yet. That's my opinion.
yeah, I totally agree with you. So people can learn more about this on your Substack. Do you want to talk about that for just a second?
And the reason why I called it Can't Be People was because the first crop circle I walked in, it was like this pentagon thing with diamonds in it, and it was just amazing. Turned out when I did my first one with that guy, it was the guy that had made it. But the first thing when I walked around and I just looked around in this crop circle. The edges were sharp, they were defined, and I just went, it can't be people. And it took me years and years of research and, as I said, going out into the fields. And it's a double entendre because I still say it can't be people because my contention is that it is people, but there's something which can't be people, which is attached to it. And the blowback that I'm getting from the community is it's not terrible, but 99% of the reactions that I'm getting off of people from outside the community, and it's very, very positive because I'm not trying to change your mind. If you want to believe that they're ET, just go on your own journey. But when you see a human made circle, don't think that we are hoaxers and we're trying to deceive you or we're laughing at you over your eyes. We're not. We're compelled to do that. I mean, I haven't been in the field for 10 years, but when you're in it, when you're in the subject and you're making, you get compelled to do it. And to go back to your original thing, you think it's your idea, and then you go and make it, and somebody's already bloody done it. And the design is completely different from anything else that's gone before. Like I said, a jellyfish. You know, no one had ever seen that before. And then it's like I was on a podcast last week, and he equated it to like Tesla and Marconi having the patenting the radio at the same time from thousands of miles away. We're having these ideas and then we think they're ours, and then we find out that someone else has had the same idea, and we've got no connection whatsoever to them because there's this myth that we're this secret society and we're close knit. It's all a load of, it's just It's not right. You might be on nodding terms with other teams, but you don't know everybody. You know,
Mhm.
your one common denominator normally is you've worked with a maestro and you've gone out and then the teams proliferate. That there was loads of teams. Um, we don't know each other a lot of the time, and yet we're coming up with the same things. And it's not like circles; it's really detailed stuff, which has never been seen before. And that's when you start to think, if you expand your mind and think, what's happening? You know.
Yeah. It's so fascinating, and you really have opened up the idea that it could be so much more than aliens. I mean,
Yeah, and the reason why I can't appear on camera, and we had a little chat before, three reasons. Firstly, even though it's 10 years since I entered the field, there is no statute of limitations. I can still be sued, or it's
mhm.
not a criminal matter, but it's a civil matter if a
Yeah.
farmer wanted to do anything, if he connects me to a circle, because it's trespass, it's vandalism. No matter how pretty it is, it's still vandalism. It's criminal damage. Another reason I don't appear on camera is because I don't really want this stuff to impinge and bleed into my personal life. And thirdly, it's not an ego thing. It's the image speaking. It's the story speaking. It's not me speaking. It's not about me. And that's why I don't want to appear on camera. I just think that it's an area that's not really discussed, and I just think there's room for it. That's all. And I just
Yeah.
invite your listeners to go on their own journey. Really,
Well, I really appreciate you joining us today, Dee. This has been a fascinating conversation.
thank you. Mutual.
To learn more about Citizen D and the crop circle phenomenon, please visit itcan'tbepeople.substack.com, and we'll be sure to put those links in the show notes below. Thanks for tuning in with us today to the U World Order Showcase podcast. If you're ready to amplify your voice, monetize your mission, and start attracting premium clients, your next step is simple. Head to coachesalchemist.com and schedule your free client acquisition audit. Be sure to join us for our next episode as we share what others are doing to raise the global frequency. And remember, change begins with you. You have all the power to change the world. Start today and get visible.